Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to Seed to Plate channel. Today we're making bacon onion jam. Yeah, that's right, you heard me. Bacon onion jam. It's amazing on burgers, on a cheese plate, but we have to start with the bacon, and you can get as fancy as you want with this. This package of bacon is from the Costco, so not that fancy, but you're going to want to pick out one piece of bacon per onion that you're going to use in this recipe. Now, if you're vegan or vegetarian, feel free to leave the bacon out, and you can just have caramelized onion jam. I like bacon, so we're going to go with bacon, and we're going to start with a low pan. So usually when you fry bacon, you want to do it at a medium heat, but for this, we're going to stick to like a medium low because the goal that we're trying to achieve here is to actually just render out the bacon fat that we can then caramelize the onions into. So instead of frying the bacon and getting that Maillard reaction really fast and potentially burning it, we're just going to render that low and slow. And today we have two onions that I actually pulled out of my garden. So these are either Texas Legend or early white grano. I don't remember which is which, but I pulled these out of the garden yesterday. I trimmed the one, and basically when you have those kinds of garden mishaps, you're going to want to trim off the roots, trim off the tops. If you can get the tops fresh enough, you can actually dice them up for green onions and throw them in the freezer. That's what I did with my first batch of onions. But we're just going to get these trimmed up and cleaned up. I did get them rinsed off to the best of my ability, but we are still going to peel them a little bit and take off at least the first layer of like really bad dirt. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to show you the easiest way to dice onions like ever. So after you get your onions all cleaned up, there's two ways you can cut these. You can cut them into like half rings if you want a bacon onion jam that is going to be a little more textured. But for mine, I like to put mine on crackers. So we're actually going to dice our onion. And this is the easiest way to dice an onion. You're going to make these vertical cuts along the onion, and then you're going to, with a flat hand, don't do what I did, you're going to cut that onion on a parallel to your cutting board and then cut down. And you're kind of making your own cross-hatch pattern so that you just have nicely diced onions. A lot of people make cutting onions way too difficult. And speaking of cutting onions, there will come a time during this process where you are going to tear up. These onions are fresh, right out of the garden. And one of my favorite things to do to actually help that process of tearing up when you're cutting onions is to actually put your whole head in your freezer for a few seconds, which I know sounds crazy, but there's something about it that messes with the fumes that are coming off of the onion to actually make it so that you stop tearing up. And here we are, y'all. All of our onions are diced. We are ready to get things moving. We're going to flip our bacon, and remember, we're doing this low and slow so that we don't burn the bacon. We just want to render out as much fat as possible because in my world, fat equals flavor. We're also going to grab our other two ingredients for this, which is a little bit of whiskey and a little bit of brown sugar. And that's all the ingredients for this bacon onion jam, which is, I guess, more of a chutney, is bacon, onions, whiskey, and brown sugar, and a little bit of salt if you end up needing it. Next step, guys, is we're going to go ahead and drain our bacon on a paper towel. It is all the way cooked. Our fat is rendered out. It's not burned. If you're doing this in large batches, I would highly recommend actually rendering your bacon fat in the oven so that it doesn't burn instead of doing it all in one pan. But now we're going to add all of our onions to our pan, and it's okay if your onions aren't in a single layer. A lot of times when you're sauteing vegetables, you want them to have enough room between them so that they don't steam each other. Especially with the onions that are fresh out of the garden, they're really high in water content because they haven't been sitting at all. They haven't had to use any of that water to stay fresh.
and so there's going to be a lot more water content in your fresh onions. And now we're going to do something real fancy. We're going to do a little tilt and flip, which I learned in my family of people who cook in restaurants and catering. And really you can do this with a spoon or you can do it with a pan flip, but the point is to get that bacon fat distributed across all of the sauteed onions that you're working on. Now we are going to do a medium-low heat on this because our goal is not to create a Maillard reaction. And that Maillard reaction is when you brown something and it gives it that tasty brown flavor. Our goal here is to reduce the onions to this. So this is what you want your onions to look like. I haven't added anything to this pan of onions. It's been cooking for about 30 minutes. And your goal is to really reduce these onions down so that they release their sugars, they release some of their moisture, and now we can add a little bit of moisture in terms of whiskey. Now, I don't actually measure this. I just throw in a splash. Please be very careful when you do this. Alcohol like this can create a flame. It'll burn off, but I also don't want you to fry off your eyebrows. I like your eyebrows. I like the way they look on your face. So when you're pouring alcohol into any kind of a hot pan that has a flame under it, especially if it's a natural gas flame, please make sure there's nothing flammable around you. Please make sure you pour the alcohol away from your body just in case it ignites in flame. That is Brooke's safety message of the day, and now we're going to get some bacon chopping. So with the bacon, this is very much a personal call. I like to have the bacon really finely diced, but not quite like bacon powder. So I still like to have a few little chunks of bacon, but if it's big enough to get stuck in the back of my molars, it's too big. So I pretty finely dice my bacon, but this is totally up to you, just like cutting the onions. If you want bigger chunks of bacon, have your bigger chunks of bacon. We originally got this recipe from a restaurant called Cafe Josie that used to be in Austin. They have since shut down, but they used to put their bacon onion jam on top of their mac and cheese dish, and they left their bacon in a little bit larger chunks because it was on a bigger dish, and the purpose was to kind of like intermix it with the mac and cheese. So now we're going to add a little bit of brown sugar. Again, I don't measure anything, so I just do a spoonful. This is probably in reality like 2 tablespoons. Okay, maybe let's call it 3 tablespoons. So let's call it 3 tablespoons, but again, this is a recipe that you should play around with and see how sweet you like it. I actually got this one a little bit too sweet, and I ended up having to add a little bit of salt to balance it out a little bit later on in the process. So we want to make sure that brown sugar gets nice and reduced. So at the end, before you add the bacon, which we're doing now, you want to make sure that when you move your spoon through the pan, you're not seeing any kind of trailing moisture. So this is a pretty quote-unquote dry pan. You don't want to see any moisture that's trailing in the bottom when you move your spoon across the bottom of the pan. But this is in a really good place right now. You can take this to a further reduction. So before you add your whiskey and before you add your brown sugar, you could reduce it further if you want to. I still like to have a little bit of texture on my onions. I don't like them to be completely disintegrated when I put them in my mouth. Like I said, this one I got a little bit too sweet, so I'm just adding a couple of sprinkles of salt. And again, not measuring this, I'm just doing this by taste. So encourage you to taste as you go. Make sure, it's to your taste. Some people like it sweeter. Some people like it a little more balanced and savory. It really just depends. And this is a bacon onion jam I made about a week ago. And they fit really well in these cute little jars. And they're really awesome for gifting. Now again, this is not a jam that is necessarily preserved the way that a fruit jam would be preserved. So you do need to keep this refrigerated and eat it within a couple of weeks. I make bacon onion jam once a year. I give it away as gifts. People absolutely love it. And it's so good on burgers. It's really good on a cheese plate. And it's really just kind of a fun novelty to have around if you have extra onions out of your garden. But thanks so much for watching. Happy gardening, happy cooking, and we'll see you next time.